Both Al-Hadath TV and Al Jazeera broadcast live footage in which heavy gunfire was heard and people were seen running for cover. They said it was an attempt by security forces to disperse the demonstrators. There were reports that at least 2 government soldiers were killed, but it was not immediately possible to verify. Sudan has been rocked by months of small but persistent protests that were sparked by bread price rises and cash shortages. The demonstrations later turned against President Omar al-Bashir, a former paratrooper who had been in office since 1989. Bashir, who is being sought by international prosecutors for alleged war crimes in the country's western Darfur region, has refused to step down and said his opponents needed to seek power through the ballot box. Call for restraint. Security forces have made several attempts to break up the protest, but army soldiers have repeatedly come out to protect the demonstrators, often firing shots in the air and deploying soldiers on streets around the protesters. He also said that 15 civilians and 42 members of the security forces were injured in the protests and that 2,496 protesters were arrested in Khartoum. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on Monday urged all parties in Sudan to exercise utmost restraint and avoid violence, and called for the release of detained protesters, UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said. Jamaa said 39 people had died since the onset of the protests, including 3 members of the security forces. Activists put the death toll at more than 60. For the first time in some 3 months of unrest, a group of prominent opposition leaders joined protesters outside the Defense Ministry in Khartoum. They addressed demonstrators who have been massed for 2 days outside the ministry compound and repeated their demand for Bashir and his government to step down immediately, witnesses said.